What were our takeaways from our final day in Surprise, Arizona? We'll tell you in this edition of Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are tuned into another edition of Locked On Royals in the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. You also can catch us on wherever you get your podcasts. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast. We're on Odyssey and YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If you're a first-time listener, it was probably the perfect week for you to join this podcast as we were down here in Surprise, Arizona, getting some video content, some interviews, doing some recaps each and every day. But going into next week and really all the weeks after that will be 5 episodes a week. I'll be out at Kauffman Stadium plenty of times this year, getting more quotes, more video, more content, all that type of stuff. But 5 episodes a week is our goal, although this week will be a little bit different as I'm going on vacation right after this. So we'll do an episode tomorrow morning. Might have time to pre-record something for Thursday. If not, we'll be back the following Monday for our usual schedule of 5 episodes a week. Today's show is brought to you by SelectQuote. And with SelectQuote, you can get the right life insurance for you for less at SelectQuote.com/locked-on. Well, our flight is here in about 3 or 4 hours. I'm actually doing this episode from Surprise Stadium. I'm overlooking left field at this point in time, so hopefully the connection holds up and we'll be all good. But we had a good opportunity today to get another good look at everybody throwing some live bullpens. Chris Bubich was out there today. We unfortunately had some technical difficulties, had about a 15 to 20-minute interview with Chris. It was a phenomenal sit-down. He is such an easy guy to root for, so insightful about the game as well. But the thing we were recording it on didn't actually save this recording, so that's more so on us than technology. So unfortunately, not going to be able to get that out to you guys. What I can tell you, though, is, man, he is definitely a Stanford guy, very knowledgeable about the game. Had some great stuff on his starstruck moment in the game. He said it was facing Miguel Cabrera. Said one of the guys that he struck out that really surprised him was Mike Trout early on in his career, but a great guy, super knowledgeable, and he is poised to have a big spring camp as they gear up for the regular season. And he's got my vote to win the number 5 spot in the starting rotation. Leading us into some other takeaways that we had, Jac Caglianone, of course, was another talking point. I sat down with Bobby Witt Jr. this morning. You can catch that episode on wherever you get your podcast. And he brought up Jac's name as one of the guys that stood out to him in camp. That'll be more so designed for our second segment, but plenty of good stuff from Bobby going over their mentality, what he thought about his MVP finish, or second place MVP finish, I should say, from a year ago, what he hopes to get out of camp. All that type of stuff is handled in that short 7 to 8 minute interview. And he was great to be around as well. Everybody that we talked to, had a chance to sit down with, was phenomenal for the time that we had him for, and really do appreciate that, because these guys have a job to do. They've got business to take care of, and the fact they cut out some of their time to even sit down with us for a few minutes, it shows the type of players and guys that they are, and why this clubhouse meshes so well together. There's really not a bad egg. And I know that for some of you out there, you may think of me as more of a mouthpiece, that I only promote this team. I can promise you that I do not have any promotional intent for this team. I love talking about this team. But no, I do not get anything from the Royals and saying positive things about them. But I hope you would trust me that if there was somebody that did not fit in this clubhouse, or it was very obvious that they didn't get along with other teammates, I would try to let you guys know. But 100% transparency, 100% honesty, there is nobody on this team that doesn't fit in. And that goes for the minor league level guys as well. I spoke with Javier Vaz in the clubhouse this morning, asked him about all the positions he plays, which one feels the most comfortable. He said second base, but he's open to playing just about anywhere to help his team, wherever he may be playing this year, win a lot of ball games. And that could be echoed by just about every single person down here in camp. Some of the more impressive rounds that I saw today, Taylor Clark actually went one-on-one with Melendez, Bobby Witt Jr., Massey, and Drew Waters. Stuff actually looked pretty good, and not everybody's going to be super high on Taylor Clark. They remembered what he did back in 2021 and 2022 with the team, but stuff was firm. Fastball definitely was popping. The glove had a changeup to go along nicely with that. MJ Melendez did take him deep, and he walked Bobby Witt Jr. and want to say he walked Massey one time, but also got Bobby Witt Jr. to ground out. He got MJ Melendez to ground out to second base, got Michael Massey to pop up. So overall, the stuff was pretty firm. I don't want to go as far to say wildly impressive. That I need to leave for Steven Cruz. I put a video out there on my Twitter page on Steven Cruz. He was facing Nelson Velasquez, Jac Caglianone, Michael Garcia, and one other player I can't think of off the top of my head. That stuff was devastating, though. And he's one of those guys that I'm keeping my eye on once games begin. Of course, right here at Surprise Stadium on Friday, first pitch at 2:05, with Daniel Lynch being on the bump for Kansas City. Noah Cameron and Chandler Champlain will piggyback with him. But when it comes to Steven Cruz, it was Michael Garcia that led off against him in this, 5-6 batter face-off that he had. But Michael roped one up the middle, had a 100+ mile an hour exit velo ground ball right back up the middle. Steven Cruz had to hurdle it basically to get out of the way of it. After that, the stuff was just devastating, as I said. And where I described Taylor Clark's stuff as firm, Steven Cruz's stuff was wildly impressive. That's what was more fit for the definition there for Steven Cruz, because he's throwing upwards of 97, 98, 99, and at times even 100. They had all these cameras and machines set up behind the catcher to clock the spin rate, clock some of the movement, the velocity, all that jazz. But you could hear the velocity coming out of the hand of Steven Cruz. In fact, if you go check out that video that I posted, there is that zip on the strikeout that he has of Dairon Blanco. That was the other name I forgot to mention in this, square off that he was having. But after that Michael Garcia single, he struck out Dairon Blanco looking. He faced Jac Caglianone, who, of course, has been the talk of camp, and he struck him out on 4 pitches. The strikeout pitch was a fastball up and away. Not going to fault Jack too much on that, because nobody truly looked comfortable against Steven Cruz. And when he's 6'8", 260, 265, he's halfway to home plate by the time the ball leaves his hand. So that 97, 98 has to feel like, 100 to 110 to some of these guys. But he strikes out Jac Caglianone, and then Nelson Velasquez comes to the plate, and he just puts him away on a devastating slider. I've said that 3 or 4 times now, but that's truly what it was. That is exactly how I define his stuff at that point in time. And the slider down in the way, it was a pitch that I didn't see in the previous 3 or 4 at-bats. It paired nicely, though. It worked really well. And at the same time, Cruz was pitching. Angel Serpa was on the field next to him. Saw him throw a little bit. I'll be honest, he was hit around a bit. Looked a little bit like the old Angel Serpa, where was living too much in the middle of the plate, and those guys were squaring him up pretty good. At the end of the day, though, it is just BP. It is a bullpen session. These guys are working on a variety of things. It's not to put on a show for the fans or media down there to really showcase their talent. It's just to get work in. But Steven Cruz, he stood out to me as one of those guys throwing a live bullpen, and to face live hitters, that was truly a treat from earlier today. And I would say, batting-wise or at the plate, Michael Massey had some really good swings today. Oh, to bring up Chris Bubich, who we unfortunately didn't have his interview lined up for you guys to listen in length. We only got about a minute clip of it. But Chris Bubich was facing almost the top half of the lineup. Michael Massey was over there. Salvador Perez was over there. Vinny Pasquantino was, and Jonathan India. Bobby Witt Jr. was over on the field, as I said, with Melendez, Drew Waters, and Massey at one point in time. But Massey was over there for, I think, 50% of the time they were throwing these live bullpens, if you will. But Chris Bubich struck out Salvi looking. He got Vinny swinging. And then I want to say he almost struck out Michael Massey, got him to roll over to second base. That stuff looked really good as well. Where we've had these 3 descriptions of the pitchers we saw. Taylor Clark, the stuff was firm. You had Steven Cruz, where the stuff was devastating. I would say for Chris Bubich, the stuff was crisp. Located everything very well. It's unfortunate we don't have that interview because I asked him about these specific things. So certainly a frustrating part about all that. But the stuff looked crisp, and I don't want to say that those top hitters looked uncomfortable, but they weren't picking it up either. The changeup was working, the slider was working. I noticed a little bit of the gyro slider, which he called it a bullet slider in our interview because it spins like a bullet. So if you're ever wondering what a gyro slider looks like, that's how it spins. If you imagine a bullet and the way it would go towards somebody and it would spin, that's how the ball spins on this new pitch that Chris Bubich is trying to work with. Not quite a cutter, not quite a slider, somewhere in between. His stuff, though, crisp as hell, and facing the top half of the lineup of the Kansas City Royals. So those were some of my day 3 takeaways. Again, didn't have too many opportunities to go see the entirety of practice. I was down here doing a couple of interviews with 810, had a couple interviews lined up with players, but still a blast of a time down here. Hope you guys enjoyed all the content. And even when we get back, we'll have plenty of recaps of everything that went down. And we'll keep up what's still going on down here with the great Annie Rogers and Jalen Thompson, who are still going to be giving you guys content every single day, writing stories. I've loved everything I've read from them over the past few days, and I will continue to do so leading up to the start of the regular season and into the regular season. I'm not going to stop reading it just because spring training would end and we don't have full access anymore. Definitely throughout the regular season. Can't wait to see what they have in store. Okay, we're going to take our first break of the show. When we come back, want to dive into something that Bobby Witt Jr. told me in our interview this morning. Jac Caglianone standing out, but why is he standing out in camp? I'll tell you next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I am your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to our one and only sponsor in SelectQuote. In sports, having a winning strategy is everything. It's how the best teams make it to the Super Bowl, the World Series, and the Olympics. The same goes for life. Having a strategy like life insurance from SelectQuote can protect your financial legacy and keep your family's future secure. SelectQuote makes it easy to find the perfect life insurance policy. As one of America's leading insurance brokers with nearly 40 years of experience, they've helped over 2 million customers find $700 billion in coverage since 1985. What sets SelectQuote apart is their personal touch. Unlike other brokers that offer one-size-fits-all policies, their licensed agents tailor coverage to fit your unique needs. If you're in good health, you might even qualify for same-day coverage of up to $5 million, no medical exam required. It's more affordable than you think, too, where you can get up to $1 million in coverage for as little as $20 a month. Get the right life insurance for you for less at SelectQuote.com/lockedon. Go to SelectQuote.com/lockedon today to get started. That's SelectQuote.com/lockedon. SelectQuote, they shop, you save. Our headliner today, as I am here doing this podcast episode in an empty Surprise Stadium. You probably heard some of the carts rolling around. Somebody's cutting the grass out on the berm in center field. It smells like baseball for those of you that know what I'm talking about. Hopefully, some of you guys listening are able to make the trip out here and watch some games because it's gorgeous. The weather's gorgeous. Everything about this complex, this city in general, is absolutely phenomenal. I love coming down here every single year and plan to next year as well to give you even better coverage than we had in this go-around. But as for that headlining interview this morning, Bobby Witt Jr. had a chance to sit down. You can check it out on all of our podcasting platforms. Don't have video on that just because we don't have the computer set up in the way that it would work. But still, you can listen to some nice audio there from what the Royal Superstar had to say. But one of the things that everybody wanted to know about with Bobby Witt Jr. is what he thinks about Jac Caglianone. And if Jac Caglianone is somebody that is blending in well, if he is somebody that can be an everyday player in Kansas City, he's not going to have the answer to all of that. And Jac Caglianone did, in fact, speak to the media earlier today, had some interesting stuff to say. Nothing too groundbreaking, but he's somebody that knows the media is going to be following him wherever he goes. But with Bobby Witt Jr. and his answer, what I loved about it was that it was not a question directly about Jac Caglianone. And in fact, I didn't know that he was going to go that direction. Thought he might bring up one of the regulars from last year. Thought he might bring up a pitcher that he's been facing so far in camp. But when I asked him the question of who has stood out so far in camp, even though it's so early, he responded with Jac Caglianone and a little bit of his sheer size. And I've brought this up before in the 2 other podcasts we've done down here, but he's a big dude. He's a big kid. And Bobby Witt brings up, his hands are huge. He's just an imposing guy, but also he said the BP rounds he's been taking, that's been noticed by everybody out there, and how nice of a guy he is, how kind he is, and all of that coming together. Bobby just went on to say it's nice to see. You have somebody that's at their first big league camp, lots of pressure on him, but as Bobby would say, pressure is something you want to embrace. Pressure is a privilege, as he went on to say, and that goes the same with Jac Caglianone. And another question I was able to ask him, which if you haven't listened to the interview, he will get to this at some point, but Jac's going through something similar to what Bobby did. And with Bobby Witt Jr., he had that pressure from the time he was drafted, and once he showed up to camp, to be a star, to be somebody that everybody was going to be talking about. And the veterans and the everyday players brought up Bobby Witt Jr. in that first camp, where he's just different, right? He's not scared by any moment. He's not intimidated by any of us. He is such an extraordinary talent. And today, and really this week, with some of the answers we've gotten, that's been echoed. Where I asked Michael Massey, who's somebody that stood out, Jac Caglianone. Asked Lucas Ursig about it, Jac Caglianone. Asked Bobby about it. And to get that reassurance from those guys, you know what type of talent he is. But what I mean with he's going through similar stuff as Bobby, Jac's coming here to camp with the pressure of, for some fans out there, to make it up to the big leagues early on, where he only needs 30 or 40 games. And when I asked J.J. Picola about that the other day, I didn't get the sense that he feels he is super close. He's at big league camp, so that means they feel he is able to compete with some of the everyday players up here. It doesn't mean, though, that he is a week away or 2 weeks away. He's going to get his opportunity to compete here in camp, but I'd imagine he's going to go down to Double-A, and he's going to have this opportunity to progress to the minor league level in the same way Bobby Witt Jr. was. But to have that pressure, Bobby said he can be that guy to almost lean on, where I've been through this before. I know what this pressure is like, and here's how you get through it when you're playing well, when you're not playing as well, and at the end of the day, how you can help your team through this. If you're not hitting well at the plate, you got to be doing something in the field. If you're doing something in the field, you got to be sure to do something at the plate, moving runners, taking walks, doing this and that. And that's why it's great to have a superstar like Bobby here to mentor, even though Bobby Witt Jr. doesn't need to be a mentor at 24, 25 years old, but Jac's now younger than him. It's crazy to think that he's entering his third big league season. He now has MLB experience. He's played in the postseason. That's going to help him in talking to guys like Carter Jensen, like Blake Mitchell, like Jac Caglianone. And one more thing on that, when it comes to how the organization believes in him, you evaluate all these players in camp, and some guys, you notice who they are right off the bat. When you see Vinny Pasquantino walking around, you know that's Vinny Pasquantino. When you see Salvi walking around, you know that Salvador Perez is right there in front of you. He's got the catcher's gear on, or he's just walking around with the bat, and he's mingling with other guys. For some of these other non-roster invites and these younger players, they don't stand out of the crowd, and almost everybody in camp had a lineman number, I like to call it. Number 82, number 93, number 77. Like Carter Jensen's got a numbers in the 70s, and he's still a top prospect on this team. Jac Caglianone's number 14. And I don't believe that is just coincidental, because what we've seen in the last 2 years in spring training, where the younger guys, the prospects, they get a terrible number. And it is a terrible baseball number to have 83 or 86, something like that, unless it does have true meaning for that player. It's not a coincidence that Jac Caglianone has 14. That feels like a number that is going to stick with him throughout the minor league system, and likely one day when he gets to Kansas City. The reason I say that is Bobby Witt Jr. had the exact same thing. He was number 7 very early on into his minor league career. People were buying jerseys. Hey, I'm picking number 7. And what happened when he got to Kansas City and it had his debut on opening day? He was number 7. So there is that difference where Jac Caglianone, as Piccolo told me yesterday, first time in a long time in big league camp, they've had somebody doing this, where he hasn't had a full minor league season, and yet here he is with all the big leaguers. It's been a long time since that's happened. It usually takes a year or two for them to get seasoned, then they get that invite. And for Jac Caglianone, yeah, he is somebody that has high expectations. He has that pressure, and he seems more than equipped to be able to handle that type of pressure. Okay, we're going to take our final break of the show. When we come back, got this question on YouTube about if the team is still valuing and focusing on speed and defense. I'll give you my thoughts next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find our podcast and our special interviews on wherever you get your podcast. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast, we're on Odyssey, and YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. The last segment we're going to have here while we're down in Surprise, Arizona, as I'm doing this podcast by the concessions of Surprise Stadium. The Royals are going to be playing a game here against the Texas Rangers, who they share this complex with. On Friday, Daniel Lynch is going to get the ball at 2:05. You can hear the lawnmower likely in the background. You've had carts that are moving around here. I'm one of the last few people here in the stadium today, so I got to make sure I wrap this thing up rather quickly. You can also hear the Jets flying around here. So still some noise, still some commotion, but for the most part, it's been relatively quiet. So for our final segment, I wanted to dive into this a little bit because I got a question from a very loyal listener on YouTube. So give a shout out to him. Question about the speed and defense. Is it still a focus here in camp? How are they approaching it? Is anything different with this team? And I would say this, and I've said this in almost all the interviews I've been on today and yesterday and the day before. The Royals still put a lot of stock into defense. And if they have somebody who is a below average defender, they want to do everything in their power to get them better equipped, more comfortable to handle that position. And this offseason, they go out there and acquire Jonathan India and Joey Wiemer. They bring back a couple of pieces. They have guys moving up through the system that might need to be able to adapt to other positions. The headliner in that, of course, is Jonathan India, and if he'll play second base, if he'll move around. My gut tells me at this point in time, as I'm leaving Arizona, Jonathan India would be the outfielder, whereas maybe Michael Massey would be the second baseman. There's still a lot of time to dive into that, though, and games will dictate that. So you look at something along those lines, you deal with that type of competition. They are going to sort through that in the first couple games of the year. It's just not going to take an entire spring training. I don't believe it will. With guys like this and with positions like this, you're going to know relatively soon that one of them can truly handle the position. The other one might need to stay at second base. And this goes for Maikel Garcia as well. I believe he's going to get some work out there in the outfield. They'll see how he'll pick it up. And if he can't pick it up, well, then they're not going to overdo it there. They're not going to overwork him there unless they see the true potential. So to that point about the defense, it's not reckless in my opinion. I've had some people comment about, well, it feels foolish to take a guy out of position, put him there, and if it doesn't work out, they might be screwed. I don't see it that way. They are picking guys that they feel like can move to that position and not just play it, but play it at a good level. It doesn't need to be the best of the best. It doesn't need to be elite. You're looking at guys that can handle the position and not be a liability. Some of you may take that as, well, that's a pretty low bar to clear, and that shouldn't be an issue for left field because MJ Melendez had struggled out there at times. But I do believe they moved MJ out there to his upside. He's got a very strong arm. He's athletic, and we did see a pretty big jump from 2023 to 2024. That is all a main focus for this defense is, yes, making sure your elite defenders are playing where they're supposed to, but certainly helping out guys at different positions. And if they're going to make that shift, if they're going to make that move, you got to have the potential there. You got to have the ceiling there to become a good defender. It's not something where you throw a Kendrys Morales type in right field and say, well, we just need to see if you can catch a fly ball. All of those guys are more than capable of standing out there and catching a fly ball. For example, if you put Salvador Perez in right field, he wouldn't be able to run down a screaming line drive down the line. But if there was a pop-up he had to run in on, I'd imagine he could catch that pop-up because he's a big leaguer and he's a above average big leaguer. Okay, so yes, you can see some clunkiness out there in the outfield, but when it comes to Jonathan India, when it comes to Maikel Garcia, Michael Massey, Joey Wiemer, Kyle Isbell, MJ Melendez, moving these guys around, there has to be potential there. And I see a lot of focus and a lot of stock being put into some of these guys to make that transition and it to work out. When it comes to the speed department, yes, that is still a crucial part of this team. They are going to value getting on base. They are going to value moving over to second base and causing havoc for pitchers. It's not the feel I get where Billy Beane and Moneyball Brad Pitt says, well, I pay you to get on base at first. I don't pay you to get thrown out of second base. In theory, yes, that makes a lot of sense, but the Royals have a lot of speed demons that they can utilize here on the base paths. You have Bobby Witt Jr., who needs to be better stealing bases next year. You've got somebody like Jonathan India, at table setter at the top, that needs to be able to get over to second base at times. You have guys like Kyle Isbell, who has the speed to be able to get it done. Michael Garcia, he's another guy that can swipe a lot of bases and does it better than anybody in the organization. Tyrone Blanco's that weapon off the bench. Joey Weimer's got that speed as well, just more of a bigger body. But even the in-between guys, Michael Massey, Melendez, you look at somebody off the bench, maybe a Kevin Biggio or a Nick Lofton, those guys have to be able to utilize their legs a little bit. The Royals like to cause havoc on the base paths. And if you have more on-base guys that can work the count, well, that can lead you to a lot of victories, truly, because if you work the count, you're getting on base, you're swiping second, getting guys over, putting pressure on pitchers, and you have them run by the fourth or fifth inning, guess what? That lines you up really nicely to win that game with a good bullpen, which the Royals have added to this season, paired it with the guys that were successful in the postseason and the second half of last year, and you feel good about that part. But when it comes to speed and defense, yes, that is very much still a focus. They've got their coaches out there to begin practice. They do base running drills. You have guys, too, with the defensive drills, outfielders. They've got Rusty Kuntz working with them on the bases. They got Damon Hollins out there in the infield. They got Jose Aguasil. They've got Vance Wilson working with guys really across the board. There are multiple coaches doing work out there to better this team's defensive abilities, to better this team's skill on the base paths, because those are the little margins they have to excel at to be a good baseball team. And if they are excelling at those aspects, we've seen them for years, even on the 100-plus loss teams, have a good defense, have good speed, be able to steal bases, take that extra base. That is an aggressive mentality that is carried over from team to team to team to team, so on and so forth. And that's a focus they have. So to answer that question, I know I've been rambling on for a long time here. To answer that question, yes, it is a focus. What I do see a difference in now is more of a mature and prepared approach at the plate. You bring in Jonathan India. You've seen this from time to time now with Bobby Witt Jr., with Michael Massey, Vinny Pasquantino. Working the count is just as important as, being that guy that can ambush and get on base with a first pitch single or a second pitch single, something like that. If you work the count, and you don't get on base, it's still valuable. Where you run the risk as a guy that ambushes first pitch, second pitch, those are things that can keep a pitcher with a low pitch count. They get out of the game, or they get out of the inning with ease. They can work deep into the game. The focus, it felt like years ago, was we want to be aggressive. We want to steal bases. We value defense, and we want to jump on these guys. And, yeah, it can work if you have Alcides Escobar and in a hot stretch, he's able to ambush the first pitch and get on base. Whit Merrifield could do the same thing. However, if you aren't hitting well, if you are in a slump, that's going to result in a lot of outs, and pitchers are going to be able to have those 6-pitch innings. They're going to have those 7-pitch innings, and that's not something you want to see from the top half of your order. Now what you have at the top half of the order is a group of guys that can work the count. They are guys that are going to strike fear in opposing pitchers, and they can wear them down a little bit more. That is a focus when you have Alex Zumwalt out there. You have Keone Duren. I've heard that from everybody I've spoken to on what they want to work on, what their goal is in Surprise, especially speaking of their offensive abilities, working the count, setting the table, getting it to the next guy. That has been a focus, and I see that being a focus for the 2025 Royals. Okay, that's going to do it for our final episode down here in Surprise, Arizona. As you hear the fighter jets that are flying above me right now, so might not be able to hear me as well. But again, thank you so much for listening. Hope you guys enjoyed the content, and we will be back tomorrow. Might not have an episode, though, Thursday or Friday. But again, thank you for making Locked On Royals your first listen today. For your second, find Locked On MLB as baseball guru Sully brings a daily blend of humor and baseball, keeping you updated on every rumor and story throughout the offseason. Find Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. We'll be back tomorrow with more of a breakdown of what we saw in spring training. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.